Hi everyone, this is Elias Martin of CollectingJapanesePrints.com. Welcome to Woodblock Wednesday, where every Wednesday we get together and discuss Japanese prints, paintings, history, and culture. I've been off for the last week or so, working on my next exhibition of Western artists working in Asia. My next exhibition should go up on my website at the end of this month or the first week of October. And I thought it would be kind of nice to take a moment on Woodblock Wednesday and discuss something I'm working on, which is preparations for that exhibition. And I pulled a couple prints to discuss with all of you today. They're prints by a Shinhanga artist, a Western artist. His name is Fritz Capelari. And Capelari is an interesting artist. Firstly, he's been credited with being the first or one of the first Shinhanga artists. So it's interesting to note that for Watanabe, who started the movement, Watanabe really early on picked a Western artist to be one of his first artists producing designs for woodblock prints. And the story goes that Watanabe in 1914, 1915 went to see an exhibition of Fritz Capelari's watercolors at a department store. And he thought that the designs were really well suited to be sort of translated into woodblock print designs. And so, that's when the collaboration started. Watanabe approached Capelari and hired him to produce designs. And so basically Capelari worked with designs made in Japan. Most of them are in and around Tokyo. And then today, I wanted to bring two prints, and it's actually, these two prints are of the same design because of this period, this really early period of Shinhanga. The artist as well as the publisher was just getting acquainted with making woodblock prints. And so there's quite a bit of variances in these early printings. So you see this in Capelari, you see this in Shinsui, particularly Shinsui, and some early Hasuis. So if you've seen the first, few 4 or 5 Shinsui designs in person, you're a lucky person, by the way, they're quite rare. You'll notice that there's quite a bit of variances from impression to impression. You could say the same thing with Capelari and a handful of other artists that were working. Hasui's prints are a bit more consistent, but there's still nuances of differences from impression to impression. So without further ado, we'll go over to my print cabinet and have a look at the prints. By the way, if you're curious, this is actually my office. I'm not able to do Woodblock Wednesday in where I have my table where I usually show artwork because there's a lot of prints on the table for the new exhibition I'm working on. So this is a little sneak peek of my office. There's some bookshelves behind me, a lot of them having to do with prints. And then I have a cabinet there set aside, and then the prints are on the cabinet. So without further ado, let's have a look at the cabinet. So I'm going to walk over here to the print cabinet, and what we're looking at is a design Capelari produced in 1920. They're pine trees, and this is, I believe the pine trees are located somewhere in Tokyo. And what we have here are two impressions of the same design, but they're done really differently. I mean, not so differently, but different enough that merit our attention. And so in this print, we'll discuss first. We'll see, and the lighting here is not great because the windows to my right, but we'll make it work, I suppose. I'll angle them this way so you can see a little bit better. But In this print, we see these very large scale pine trees, and it's quite the color is quite intense and dark. It almost, I mean, it resembles what you would think, you know, you're walking up to some very old pine trees where the center is quite dark, where the light can't really penetrate through, and they're really imposing, and you could kind of see the grandeur of just the size and the shape of these beautiful old pine trees. And there's some really wonderful, rich greens that are printed into the ground there. There's bokashi, which is color variation from light to dark or dark to light. It's, you know, it's the way that the printers graded. There's a gradation of color there, and you could see that in my camera here. I hope I'm capturing it well enough. And in the background, there's this also beautiful bokashi in the sky. You see this blue purple tone that sort of fades out to a lighter color. And then there's some more blue, light sky blue. And then we have these wonderful clouds that are basically ellipses that echo the shape of the pines, you know, quite nicely. And what else can I tell you? Here we have a very early Watanabe seal. This is a pre-earthquake Watanabe seal. And these being pre-earthquake prints, that's the particular seal you should expect to see. And then you see Capelari's interesting signature. There's Fritz Capelari with his date 1920, and it's done in that sort of Art Deco style of signature. It's this, you know, it's not a moon, but he's inspired by Japanese characters, and he creates his own sort of signature. And then the font of 1920 is very, very indicative of the period. So I think that's kind of neat. The other thing I'll point out is that there is another early Watanabe seal, square seal on the left side. And so, you know, this is a really beautiful early pre-earthquake Shinhanga design. It has everything you would expect, this rich, deep pigments, the way that it's printed, it's very expressive, it's very commanding. You know, you see it in person and you just can't help but to look. And next to it, the next print we'll discuss is the same design, of course, but done in a very different way. The print, I almost think it's a trial. And the way that it's printed, you see a lot of the Beren work. So basically, the way that it's printed with a lighter coloration. And the printers used this circular printing device made out of bamboo, and they would rub this circular device on the back of the print. And there's a certain technique that creates this kind of rough printing that gives this kind of almost grainy texture. You could also see the circular marks of the Beren throughout the design, which is very cool. A lot of print collectors love to see those effects in prints. It highlights the way the print was produced, and it gives it a really interesting texture. And obviously here, these two prints showcase different printing techniques to achieve two very different effects from the same wood blocks, which I think is neat. It also sort of showcases how the dawn of the Shinhanga movement was one of trial and error and experimentation. Watanabe wasn't quite sure how to produce prints in the way that, you know, later on in the late 20s and 30s, they were churning them out and they knew exactly what they wanted. Watanabe and the artist were sort of experimenting to see what they can do and how to best produce it. And of course, I should point out that the experimentation is not just artistic, it's also an experimentation that's based on financial factors. Watanabe wanted to produce designs that were easily achievable by his woodblock printers, as well, and so they needed to figure out how much work can go into each single sheet in printing so that, he can make a profit. He's obviously paying his printers, and he needs to know, well, how much time can each printer or each print be, how much time should be allocated to each print, basically what I'm trying to say. So, in the early period, you're going to find trial prints, and you're going to find prints that showcase the trial and error and the sort of experimentation that's taking place. So, I just want to zoom in on both prints so that you could see the difference between one impression and another. And you get a really good sense of the rough kind of texture of the grass and on the bark and on the tree limbs and the leaves there. And of course we have the signature there that is on the earlier print. And here we also have an early signature with a date, but no Watanabe seal there, so it's kind of interesting. Now I want to go back to this one so you could quickly notice the difference between both printings. Very different in terms of the effects. It's kind of amazing to compare these two and realize that the difference between these two impressions is basically the printing approach. So I'm going to back up so that you could kind of see. It's not as nice as laying them out on my table, but to give you a sense of scale, the printing, the print format is interesting. It's not Oban. This is wider than Oban, but a little bit shorter. And I mean, obviously, the format is accentuating the design, but this irregular format also speaks to the fact that these are really early printings within the Shinhanga movement, when Oban-sized prints were not yet the standard size in printmaking. So Watanabe hadn't figured it out yet. He was wondering, I mean, Oban-sized prints in Edo period were the standard. However, they're not as large as Oban-sized prints done in the 20th century. We see, Watanabe clearly experimenting with the format of the print size or the print paper and how he would, decide on how to go about creating a wonderful work of art here. And so I bring up Watanabe a lot because Watanabe had a lot of control, particularly in the early period of the Shinhanga movement. It was his money, it was his vision, and he was hiring these artists to produce the kind of work that he saw a need for in the world. He also saw a commercial need, and so he made sure to hire the artists that would produce the artwork that he envisioned would be successful. So that's why I always include him in these conversations. Obviously, these two prints are based on a Capelari design that he clearly produced. He signed these two prints. But the prints themselves were much more about the workshop of Watanabe and how they were carved and how they were printed. So, excuse me, some designs from this early period of Shinhanga, if you're lucky enough to see the original watercolor paintings, either by Hasui, by Capelari, or by Shinsui, it's not exactly what you would think. There's a lot of variances based on the finished print when you compare it to the original earlier watercolor or sketch. So, I wanted to put that out there so that for all of you to understand that, You know, the Shinhanga movement is certainly a collaborative process. And in particular, this early period in the Shinhanga movement, there was so much more experimentation, but it was really based on the publisher Watanabe, on his sort of search for the ideal format and subject for Shinhanga. So I'm going to zoom in so that you can see the prints one last time. The other thing I'll point out that I just looked at, this print has no deckling around in the margins. The margins are full. It's not trimmed. It's just not deckled. Where on this impression you see deckling on the right and on the top a little bit, and maybe even on the left side as well. And that's what you're more normally used to. However, this is the same size sheet as this. This print is not trimmed, and it also shows you also with this type of paper they were using, the paper is very different. This is a much thicker paper. This is a softer paper, which will then help produce these effects. So, when a print collector is used to just seeing deckling, they may look at this print and go, there's something weird about it. But these early period prints, there's so much that they vary from impression to impression, that even the paper varies. So I just thought I'd point that out because it's worth noting. So again, because this design is done pre-earthquake, this is one of the prints that was produced before the earthquake happened in 1923. The blocks and all of the unsold inventory were destroyed in Watanabe's shop. So these are rare pre-earthquake, very early printings by Watanabe's studio. All right, I'm going to come back here and just sit for a moment. So I want to thank all of you for joining me on another installment of Woodblock Wednesday. And I just want to invite all of you, when you have a chance, to pay me a visit on my website. The website URL is collectingjapaneseprints.com. I have a variety of prints from all genres available, as well as ones that are not. Some of them have sold, but I encourage you to look around because there's a large grouping of varied prints from all over the spectrum. So we got Sakuhanga, Shinhanga, contemporary works, Western artists, and so you can learn quite a bit about each artist and about each print. Even if a print is marked sold, I would encourage you to click on it so you can learn more about the artist or that particular print. I also have a bookstore, and with a variety of books on all topics relating to Japanese prints and paintings. I encourage you to have a look, and if there's anything that I can help you out with, certainly email me and I'll be happy to assist with that as well. And lastly, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I'm in preparations for my next woodblock print exhibition, which is at the end of this month or early next. And the exhibition will highlight Western artists working in Asia with a particular emphasis on woodblock prints, but there'll definitely be some etchings and other things, some drawings possibly. Oh yes, some drawings and watercolors. So there's a wonderful group of prints and works that are coming up on my site. So I encourage you to look out for that. And if you haven't joined my mailing list, please go to my website and add your email to our mailing list, and you'll be, kept posted on what I do and all of the new wonderful things that are happening. So thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next week on our next Woodblock Wednesday. Until then, have a good week.